Good morning. My name is Lyric Stotler. I am the lead compliance specialist for the State of Missouri CDBG program. Our first session today will cover CDBG basics, including the general CDBG structure and application preparation. The purpose of this session is to assist new grant administrators in beginning the CDBG learning process. We want to introduce you to the world of CDBG, set expectations, and increase your awareness of available resources. In the spirit of full transparency, we don't expect any of you to leave this morning's sessions or even this week's sessions as CDBG experts. What we do expect from each of you is to fully engage in admin training and then use that foundational knowledge provided today and throughout the week to really take ownership of your own CDBG training experience moving forward. We have a packed agenda for this session. We'll begin with the CDBG structure, which will include roles and responsibilities and the general CDBG program structure. Then we'll hop into planning, where we'll cover some general application information and do a walkthrough of the project development process. I'll then leave you with some additional resources and have time at the end for questions. As we're going through this agenda and the rest of the presentations this week, we'll be referencing quite a few terms and acronyms that you might not have heard yet. To assist with understanding, each of you should have received a copy of the basic CDBG terms and definition sheet to reference throughout the week. Let's begin with roles and responsibilities. Administering a CDBG project is a collaborative process that requires open and frequent coordination and communication, as well as a general willingness to adapt. The key stakeholders include the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, the Missouri CDBG program, an applicant or subrecipient, a grant writer and grant administrator, an architect or engineer, a contractor, and in some instances, a developer. HUD's responsibilities include providing annual CDBG grants on a formula basis. In addition to providing a CDBG grant to Missouri annually, HUD also provides special allocations in response to certain needs. When you hear us talk about COVID projects or disaster recovery projects, those are funded from special allocations and not part of Missouri's annual CDBG grant. HUD also wants to maintain flexibility to empower communities to design and implement strategies tailored to their own needs and priorities. They emphasize consolidated planning to expand and strengthen partnerships among all levels of government and the private sector. They assist in ensuring program compliance through monitoring and provide technical assistance to build the capacity of their partners. The Missouri CDBG program, we are referred to as the grantee. Our job is to support community well-being and their capacity for growth, design a program and establish policies and procedures within statutory and regulatory parameters, select projects to award, carry out HUD's goals for CDBG, assist in ensuring project compliance through monitoring, and provide technical assistance to subrecipients to build capacity. Before we move on, let's take a brief moment to go over the CDBG organizational chart so that you know who to reach out to for various items. We're a team of 18 led by Program Manager Joe Sanning and our CDBG officers Kim Stiefer and Debbie Feeback. We also have our lovely administrative assistant Sarah Margan, who provides essential support to our team to ensure everything operates smoothly. The development team, led by Debbie Feeback, handles the early stages of projects. On the planning side in green, we have our planning specialist, Sophia, who provides technical assistance to communities all over the state as they develop projects and prepare applications. She also reviews applications for completeness and accuracy and organizes the scoring process for proposed projects. On the environmental review side in blue, we have our environmental review specialist, Hannah and Ryan, who ensure compliance with environmental review requirements and provide technical assistance to environmental review preparers. Next, we have the compliance team led by Kim Stiefer. Once a project is awarded, the assigned compliance specialist will be your main point of contact with CDBG. We ensure compliance through technical assistance and monitoring. Compliance is divided into two teams. In green, we have the annual compliance team responsible for annual and COVID projects. Each annual compliance specialist is assigned a region to serve. I serve the Southeast, then we have Ryan in the Northeast, Brandon in the South Central, and Julia in the West. In blue, we have our disaster recovery and mitigation compliance team. Tyler and Tiffany handle all disaster recovery and mitigation projects. Since DR and MIT allocations are concentrated in areas impacted by disasters, our DR team doesn't have regions assigned. Instead, projects are assigned at the time of award with consideration for workload distribution and maintaining one point of contact for each grant administrator. Lastly, we have the finance team. This team, of course, makes sure funds are being dispersed to you all, but also does a lot of mandatory reporting behind the scenes. First, we have 2 financial specialists who process requests for funds and various reports. Lisa does this for all annual and COVID projects, and Chris does this for all disaster recovery and mitigation projects. Next, we have our financial monitoring specialist, Kaylee. She conducts risk assessments for subrecipients to determine the level of technical assistance and monitoring our office will provide, and reviews certain financial reports and audits as needed. Then we have our technical assistance coordinator, Ashley, who identifies training needs and then coordinates training for both CDBG staff and external stakeholders. Now that we've introduced you to the team, we'll move on to the next role, which is the applicant or subrecipient. Pre-award, the city, county, or village is called an applicant. Once a proposed project is awarded and a grant agreement is executed, the applicant becomes a subrecipient. The applicant must determine needs and ensure eligibility, maintain knowledge of CDBG requirements, carry out the project in accordance with their grant agreement, comply with all federal and state requirements, meet all established performance goals, ensure proper financial management, authorize requests, and maintain records. The record-keeping responsibility gets its own slide because it's incredibly important. The subrecipient is responsible for record keeping, but the grant administrator will typically assist in file management. The subrecipient should have all original documents, and the grant administrator typically maintains copies as a backup. We highly recommend establishing the local project file in accordance with our CDBG documentation checklist, which is available on our website. Especially for newer grant administrators, the checklist is a tool built to assist in ensuring that all required documentation is on file and available for monitoring. The subrecipient does have the option of paper or digital record retention, as long as all records are available for monitoring and accessible to the public. If a subrecipient does choose the digital route, please make sure that they're still keeping the paper originals of any items with wet signatures and protecting any personally identifiable information such as social security numbers or beneficiary addresses. Grant writer and grant administrator responsibilities vary, so of course please review the project scope in the administration contract for a list of project-specific responsibilities. Generally speaking, responsibilities include acting as the main liaison between the CDBG compliance specialist, subrecipient, any sub-applicants, and contracted firms, assisting with CDBG compliance, maintaining current knowledge of CDBG requirements. This begins at your office with the onboarding process, and then once the onboarding process is complete, that maintenance of CDBG knowledge might include attending monthly CDBG training webinars, reaching out to your assigned compliance specialist for training in areas of need, and tuning into our CDBG policy office hours to learn about any policy changes. You'll also prepare and submit various requests and reports. The subrecipient will be signing off on requested reports, but they will likely need your assistance in preparing those items in a compliant manner. You'll organize events such as public hearings and assist in the CDBG monitoring visits and resolving any concerns. Most projects, aside from demolition and certain DR and MIT categories, will require an engineer or architect. Again, responsibilities will vary, so it's important to take a look at the scope of work in the contract for this service. But typically, the engineer or architect will design, plan, and prepare for the project, prepare a preliminary engineering report or preliminary architectural report in compliance with the application guidelines, conduct inspections, assist in providing documentation, prepare easements, and hold pre-construction conferences and monthly progress meetings. Aside from the main responsibility of executing the project, the prime contractor plays a significant role in labor standards compliance. Responsibilities vary, but typically include executing the project in compliance with applicable requirements, adhering to plans, tracking progress, managing subcontractors, providing weekly certified payrolls, and displaying required posters at the job site. For anyone working on disaster recovery housing projects, you may also work with a developer. Again, responsibilities vary, but typically include maintaining site control, assuming the risk of the development, providing deliverables in accordance with applicable requirements, selecting and managing contractors, and additional administrative duties as needed. In this section, we'll discuss where the various CDBG compliance requirements come from and the basics of how we can all navigate those requirements. The foundation of the CDBG program structure is the Housing and Community Development Act, and then we have several layers of requirements that exist and build on each other. Differences between layers are controlled by the more stringent requirements, and any conflicts between layers are controlled by the preceding level. Again, we don't expect grant administrators to memorize the requirements of every layer of the program structure we discussed this morning, but we do hope that you walk away with a basic understanding of where requirements come from and why they exist, and then use that foundational knowledge to continue learning and eventually reach a capacity where you can confidently administer CDBG projects in a compliant manner. As we move forward to take a deeper dive into each of these layers, we'll see that the program structure really leans into that idea of comprehensive planning for community development that involves all levels of government and the private sector. We'll begin with the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974. You may also hear this referred to as the HCDA or just the Act. The HCDA created the CDBG program. Prior to the HCDA, there were separate programs including open space, urban renewal, neighborhood development, historic preservation, model cities supplemental grants, public facilities loans, neighborhood facilities grants, and water sewer grants. The HCDA combined these resources from those categorical grants into one block grant. The primary objective is to develop viable communities by providing principally persons of low and moderate income, decent housing, a suitable living environment, and expanded economic opportunities. The CDBG funding allocation occurs under each year's federal budget. CDBG started as entitlement only. In 1982, it was expanded to include non-entitlement communities. Today, 70% of CDBG funding goes to entitlement communities to administer directly, and 30% goes to the states to assist non-entitlement communities. The set-asides are then further allocated on a formula basis. The formula for the state set-aside considers the percentage of impoverished persons, the number of pre-1940 housing units, and the population. Missouri has received around $23 million per year in recent years, but that number is dependent on the total CDBG allocation in the federal budget. Next, we have the Code of Federal Regulations, or the CFRs. This layer may also encompass relevant Federal Register notices. We use federal regulations as the basis for program determinations before consulting state regulations or program policies. The federal regulations for the state CDBG program are located at 24 CFR Part 570. These provide guidance on topics related specifically to the state CDBG program and are typically unchanging. HUD does give the state maximum feasible deference, meaning that the state has some flexibility in interpreting these regulations as long as we don't contradict the HCDA. Cross-cutting regulations apply to all federal grant programs. Rather than restating the cross-cutting requirements in the federal regulations for each program, these are incorporated by reference in the CDBG regulations. Many of the upcoming training sessions will cover these cross-cutting regulations in more detail and clarify the state's interpretations of certain regulations. These first two relate to financial management and audits. The next four will be discussed during civil rights training. The URA covers requirements related to acquisition and relocation as a result of a federally funded project. Environmental will be covered later. Citizen participation covers requirements related to informing the public and soliciting feedback. And lead-based paint typically comes into play for housing projects. Next, we have the state regulations. There are two references to CDBG in state statute. One requires RPCs to report their CDBG matching expenditures to the Office of Administration. The other allows the local government to create rent restrictions to maintain CDBG compliance, which is typically disallowed under other circumstances. Certain entities may also be subject to additional requirements. For example, when we get to the procurement session this week, we'll see that counties have some additional procurement requirements based on state statute. Next, we have the consolidated plan, and this is where our office and you all begin to have some more control over program operations. This 5-year planning document comes back to HUD's goal of consolidating planning efforts to strengthen partnerships between all levels of government and the private sector. In addition to the Missouri CDBG program, the CON plan identifies goals for the Home Investment Partnership Program, Emergency Solutions Grant, and National Housing Trust Fund under the Missouri Housing Development Commission, and the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS, or HOPWA program, under the Department of Health and Senior Services. All of our funded activities must align with these goals and improve performance measures. Our current CON plan period is from 2022 through 2027. The consolidated plan begins with information gathering. Various surveys are sent out by each agency, and informational meetings are held as part of the planning process to encourage citizen participation. Also, a needs assessment and any applicable market analyses are conducted to help assess needs. On the MHGC and DHSS side of things, the needs focus on housing disparities, public housing, and homelessness. On the CDBG side, we focus on community development needs such as infrastructure, community facilities, and demolitions. Once we gather information, we move to the actual planning portion. We identify any special needs that might include specific geographic targets or other priority needs. We also identify the anticipated resources and delivery structure, and then lay out our strategies to address the needs for the next 5 years. While the CON plan covers the overall program and expectations for a 5-year period, the action plan covers the specifics of program implementation based on actual allocations. The action plan runs from April 1st to March 31st of each year and identifies the goals and performance measures from the CON plan under which each program will operate for the year. This is required to be aligned with the CON plan as well as all of the layers we've discussed previously. Surveys and public hearings are also conducted for the action plan, so all of you will have opportunities to comment on our draft action plans. The contents of the action plan include available resources, goals and objectives, allocation priorities, method of distribution, projects and desired outcomes, and program-specific requirements. We've now made it to the policies and guidelines, which you all will be interacting with quite a bit and learning a lot more about throughout the week. Policies and guidelines are built by CDBG staff members and available on our website. The CDBG Administrative Manual encompasses our policies that assist administrators with managing a project throughout its life. The CDBG Application Guidelines assist applicants and grant writers with applying for CDBG funds. Policies and guidelines are subject to revisions. As policies are revised, all policies are revised in advance of our annual admin training, and application guidelines are revised before an application cycle opens. We also make revisions as issues arise. For example, maybe we notice that administrators regularly ask for clarity on a specific topic, so we revise a policy to provide additional guidance, or maybe a new federal regulation comes out that triggers a change to our policies. Whatever the case may be, anytime we consider changing policies or guidelines, we do have to go through the process of ensuring that the proposed change aligns with the HCDA, federal and state regulations, the CON plan, and the action plan. For the administrative manual, we first have our cross-cutting chapters that apply to all projects. We will provide sessions on almost all these chapters throughout the week. This includes introduction and administration, personally identifiable information, citizen participation, financial management, cost reasonableness, monitoring and risk assessment, duplication of benefits, environmental review, procurement and contract management, labor standards, civil rights in Section 3, acquisition and relocation, and closeout. We also have some activity-specific policies within our admin manual. We will have demolition and economic development sessions this week. The remaining chapters are only applicable to DR and MIT projects and will not be covered this week, but we do have some trainings available on our website, and please always feel free to reach out to your assigned compliance specialist for trainings in areas of need. Our application guidelines identify relevant information for the program, including application categories, maximums, required documentation, eligible activities, procurement for pre-selected services, applicant eligibility, and evaluation criteria. At the top of our pyramid are CDBG projects, and this is where the local government and grant administrators start to get much more hands-on with the process. We use the competitive method of distribution, so local governments will submit proposed projects to our office, and then we choose which projects to fund. Keep in mind that each project is subject to all the structural layers in this pyramid, as well as local laws and the project's grant agreement. Now that we've covered the structural basics, let's jump into the project planning process. We'll start with some general application information and then dive into the step-by-step planning process. The top 4 application types in blue are funded from our annual allocation, and we'll discuss these applications in more detail today. The bottom 4 in gray were funded from special allocations and are no longer accepting applications, but some of you may have inherited some of these projects post-award. Competitive applications include community facility improvements, public infrastructure improvements, and demolition. We are not currently accepting applications under this category. For our water wastewater program, we can fund water treatment and distribution improvements, as well as sewer treatment and collection improvements. Under economic development, we can do downtown revitalization and industrial infrastructure improvements. Our disaster recovery program, again, is no longer accepting applications, but it was designed to alleviate unmet housing and infrastructure needs related to presidentially declared disaster events. The mitigation program improved resiliency to future disaster events. The neighborhood stabilization program assisted in rehabilitation of homes in response to the 2008 foreclosure crisis. And the COVID-19 projects, of course, alleviated unmet needs related to preventing, preparing for, and responding to COVID-19. The competitive cycle typically runs from April through July of each year. Under the community facilities category, we help communities construct and rehabilitate facilities that will serve a large portion of the public with a variety of services. Communities can utilize this program to construct community centers, senior centers, rural health clinics, daycare centers, and 911 centers. Eligible facilities must be owned by a local government or nonprofit agency. Keep in mind that we can't fund improvements to city halls or county courthouses. The CDBG funded construction budget cannot exceed $500,000 per household or $5,000 per household benefiting. Under the infrastructure category, we improve local publicly owned streets, drainage, bridges, and other infrastructure activities. This excludes drinking water and wastewater projects, which should be applied for under the water and wastewater program. The CDBG funded construction budget cannot exceed $500,000 total or $5,000 per household benefiting. Under the demolition program, we help communities with the demolition of vacant, dilapidated structures in designated areas or specific locations of slum and blight that present safety hazards to residents. The structures can be publicly or privately owned, but the owners have to provide their consent to demolish. The maximum CDBG funded demolition is $200,000 for residential only projects and $300,000 for projects including commercial structures. This category also requires match. Property owners must contribute 20% of the demolition cost for commercial structures and $500 for residential structures. Our water wastewater program is administered in partnership with the Department of Natural Resources State Revolving Fund and the U.S. Department of Agriculture Rural Development. This covers water treatment and distribution improvements, as well as sewer treatment and collection improvements. This operates on an open cycle, meaning that we accept applications year-round until funding is exhausted. We do say year-round, but keep in mind that if the applicant is applying for a competitive grant through DNR as part of the proposed project, the DNR competitive grants are due by March 1st of every year. The CDBG maximum is $750,000 total and $5,000 per household. Under this category, our office may occasionally grant an exception to spend up to $7,500 per household if there are less than 100 families benefiting. The economic development categories operate on an open cycle. First, we have industrial infrastructure. Similarly to the general infrastructure category under the competitive cycle, the industrial infrastructure program improves publicly owned infrastructure. Where these two categories differ is that general infrastructure benefits the majority of residents in a community, and industrial infrastructure supports a private entity in exchange for the private entity committing to creating or retaining jobs for low to moderate income persons. CDBG maximums for industrial infrastructure projects differ depending on the length of the business's financial history. For startups, which are businesses with 3 years or less of financial history, the CDBG maximum is $350,000 total, not to exceed 50%, and $20,000 per job. For existing businesses, which are businesses with more than 3 years of financial history, the CDBG maximum is $2 million total and $20,000 per job. All industrial infrastructure projects require a 15% match and a one-for-one capital investment. Next, we have our downtown revitalization program. Under this program, you may include improvements to the front and side facades of eligible buildings in core downtown areas, downtown building improvements that address threats to health and safety, or other public improvements directly related to downtown revitalization. The CDBG maximum is $750,000 total, and a 20% match is required. Emergency applications address emergency conditions threatening the public health and safety that require immediate resolution. These operate on an open cycle, but the application must be submitted within 18 months of the emergency event in order to qualify as an urgent need. Long-term recovery applications are for proposed projects with long-term needs to repair or construct public infrastructure, and this can include water and sewer systems. There's no maximum, but please keep in mind that the funding can only cover the emergency repair, so the project scope should not go beyond what's needed to address or recover from the emergency. The submission process varies depending on the type of application. For the annual competitive cycle in economic development, we use Submittable. For emergency and long-term recovery projects, you'll request an application template from the CDBG development team and then submit that through our MoFTP file transfer system. Our technical assistance coordinator, Ashley, will cover using the FTP later today. For the water wastewater program, you'll acquire the Missouri Water Wastewater Review Committee proposal form from one of the 3 funding partners, either our office, DNR SRF, or USDA Rural Development. Then you'll submit that to CDBG along with a preliminary engineering report. If CDBG funding is appropriate, an invitation to apply and application template will be provided to the applicant. Then the applicant will have 60 days to complete and submit the full application. We do offer a variety of resources to assist in project development and application submission. Ashley will show us where to find these resources later today during the CDBG website walkthrough. First, we have the application guidelines. All applications and supporting documentation must be submitted in accordance with these. Please review these entirely before preparing an application. Next, we have our application companion guide. This guide assists in collecting necessary reporting data for application submission. We also have a submittable companion guide to assist in navigating submittable. We offer application office hours. These occur every Wednesday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. The development team hops on a virtual meeting and is available to answer any project development questions that you may have. Templates of all of the forms requested for the application are available on our CDBG webpage. And lastly, we have our CDBG development team. If you're ever unsure about any project development steps, especially related to eligibility, please contact the development team. Moving on to the actual project development process. We've laid out this process linearly for ease of understanding the material, but you may be completing some of these steps simultaneously. During the first few steps, the applicant typically works with the CDBG development team to ensure the project is suitable for CDBG funding. Our development team will discuss the preliminary service area, eligibility, and national objective with the applicant before a grant writer is selected. After a grant writer is selected, the applicant and grant writer will work together to build out those preliminary determinations for application submission. The CDBG application will prompt you to provide narratives and documentation related to each of these steps, so it's important to begin maintaining documentation early and often. Ideally, the grant writer would have all documentation ready to go before sitting down to complete the application. This enables you to complete the application in one sitting with comprehensive and consistent responses that are backed up by relevant supporting documentation. Next, we'll cover each of these steps in more detail. Step 1 is to determine needs. At the time an applicant begins considering applying for CDBG funds, we know that the local governing body typically has an idea of needs in the community. However, public opinion may differ from the opinion of the governing body, so it's important to solicit citizen views on the current priority needs. The Community Needs Assessment pictured on this slide is a required document for all CDBG applications to ensure that the project is addressing a community-driven need. While we don't require this to be completed at the application public hearing that we'll discuss later, that's typically when most communities take care of this requirement. If the primary applicant has a written, adopted, current capital improvement plan, comprehensive plan, or other plan that identifies the proposed project, it may be substituted for the community needs assessment, but it does not replace the need for the public hearing that we'll discuss later. When filling out the CDBG application, you'll be prompted to respond to narrative questions about the need and upload the community needs assessment. Next, we determine the service area, which is the specific portion of a jurisdiction that will benefit from an activity. For the CDBG application, one of the narrative questions will ask you to justify the service area based on these factors, and you'll be prompted to provide a map showing the service area. First, we consider the nature of the activity. In determining the boundaries of the area served, the size of the improvement and how it's equipped need to be considered. For example, a park that is expected to serve an entire neighborhood can't be so small or have so little equipment that it would only be able to serve a handful of persons at any one time. On the other hand, a park which contains a ball field with grandstands that can accommodate hundreds of spectators couldn't reasonably be said to be designed to serve a single neighborhood. The same comparison would apply to the case of assisting a small 2-lane street in a residential neighborhood versus that of assisting a 4-lane street that may pass through the neighborhood but is clearly used primarily by persons passing through from other areas. Where an activity is located will also affect its capacity to serve particular areas, especially when the location of a comparable activity is considered. For example, if we're improving a community facility on the west side of town and there's already a community facility on the east side of town that provides the same services, it would be unreasonable to include the entire town as the service area. Additionally, when a facility is located near the boundary of a particular neighborhood, we could expect its service area to include portions of the adjacent neighborhood as well as the one in which it's located. The accessibility of the activity also needs to be considered. For example, if a river or an interstate highway forms a geographic barrier that separates persons residing in an area in a way that precludes them from taking advantage of a facility that is otherwise nearby, that area should not be included in determining the area served. Other limits to accessibility may apply to particular activities. For example, the time or duration that an activity would be available, access to transportation and parking, and the distance to be traveled can all constitute barriers to the ability of persons to benefit. The nature, location, and accessibility of comparable activities and services must also be considered in defining a service area. In most cases, the service area for one activity should not overlap with that of a comparable activity. So if we were looking at 2 community centers or 2 clinics or 2 neighborhood housing counseling services. Lastly, we consider fit. Because the regulations require that census data be used to the maximum extent feasible for determining the income of persons residing in service areas, the boundaries of the service area determined by the applicant for the activity need to be compared with the boundaries of census divisions like census tracts and block groups. The Tiger web application from the census is a great resource for determining which census tracts a service area includes. The census divisions that best fall within the service area should be used for defining the service area for purposes of reporting on the activity and for calculating the percentage of low to moderate income persons residing in that area. While this means that the census divisions chosen for this purpose may exclude some limited number of persons that are in the actual service area or include some who are not, the practicality of using the census data will override unless the proportion of persons so excluded or included is too large. The service area will impact the applicant structure. All applications will have a primary applicant. Except for certain special allocations, the primary applicant will be a city, village, or county. Some applications will also have a sub-applicant, which would be a nonprofit or special district. When sub-applicants are included, the applicant must submit an executed applicant-sub-applicant agreement and proof of nonprofit status for any nonprofit sub-applicants. Multi-jurisdictional applicants are necessary when proposed project beneficiaries are located across multiple jurisdictions. Selecting the primary applicant must be chosen based off the location in which the majority of the beneficiaries live or the location where the proposed project is taking place. If the inclusion of a multi-jurisdictional applicant is necessary, the applicant must submit an executed intergovernmental agreement with the CDBG application. The application will prompt you to provide some general information for each applicant and sub-applicant, like the address, contact information, as well as some required certification forms that are available on our website. The applicant eligibility determination takes 4 items into consideration. Under certain special allocations like DR, MIT, and CV, it has allowed the state to award projects to entitlement communities and regional planning commissions. But for the regular application cycles, we can only award funds to applicants meeting these requirements. There are 4 questions to consider. Number 1, is the applicant a city with less than 50,000 residents or a county with less than 200,000 residents? Number 2, does the applicant have or participate in a CDBG entitlement program? Number 3, does the applicant have any open project that was or will not be closed by the required cutoff date listed in the application guidelines? And 4, does the applicant have a delinquent audit for any year? The sub-applicant eligibility determination takes 3 items into consideration. First, is the entity a political subdivision or 501c3 nonprofit? Second, if the entity is a political subdivision, does the entity have legal jurisdiction to operate in the proposed service area? And 3, is the primary applicant addressing its own community development needs? In order to prevent overloading a community with more projects than they're able to manage at one time, we do have certain application submission maximums. Under the competitive cycle, city and village applicants may submit up to 2 applications, one for their own community needs and one on behalf of a sub-applicant. County applicants may submit up to 3 applications, 1 for their own community needs and 2 on behalf of sub-applicants. Under our open cycle, we don't have a limit on the number of submissions, but please consider capacity. Next, we'll determine the national objective. Every CDBG project must meet a national objective. The standard national objectives are listed here, but certain special allocations may have additional national objective options. First, we have low to moderate income benefit. An LMI person is a person whose household income is below 80% of the area median income for their county. When considering the LMI national objective, at least 51% of beneficiaries must fall into the LMI range. We have 4 subcategories within the LMI benefit national objective that we'll discuss in more detail. They include area benefit, limited clientele, job creation, and housing. Next, we have the elimination of slum and blight. This national objective is applicable to demolition and downtown revitalization projects that address some sort of deterioration. Last, we have addressing an urgent need. This is applicable to emergency projects that resolve a condition that threatens public health or safety. Next, we'll take a closer look at each of the national objectives. LMI benefit is the primary national objective. 70% of Missouri's annual CDBG allocation must meet this national objective. There are instances where a project might qualify for more than one national objective. In those cases, if the activity meets the LMI national objective and some other national objective, we would want to use the LMI national objective to contribute to that 70% set-aside requirement. Area benefit is the most commonly used. LMA applies when the project benefits all residents in a particular area, where at least 51% of residents are LMI persons. Examples might include improvements to public infrastructure like street improvements or rehabilitation of a community center. Area benefit could cover an entire jurisdiction under area-wide benefit or a specific portion of the jurisdiction under target area benefit. To document this national objective, option 1 is to obtain the HUD LMI census data for the service area. Instructions for this are included in the CDBG application companion guide. Keep in mind that if the HUD LMI data shows that the service area is not an LMI population, we don't necessarily have to assume that the area is non-LMI. Due to the census data's margin of error, HUD allows us to conduct an LMI survey when this occurs. Our planning specialist, Sophia, will cover LMI surveys in detail later today. Next, we have limited clientele, which benefits a specific group of persons, where at least 51% of the beneficiaries are LMI persons. Examples might include converting a building into a shelter for the unhoused or neighborhood center improvements that will exclusively serve the elderly. We have a few options under limited clientele. Option 1, the project could exclusively benefit a clientele that is generally presumed to be LMI or has a nature or location that presumes clients are primarily LMI. For example, elderly persons are presumed to be LMI, so a senior center could meet the limited clientele criteria under presumed benefit. Other groups presumed to be LMI by HUD include abused children, battered spouses, homeless persons, severely disabled persons, illiterate adults, persons living with AIDS, and migrant farm workers. Option 2 is requiring documentation on family size and income as beneficiaries participate in the activity so that it's evident that at least 51% of the clientele are persons whose family income does not exceed the LMI limit. This option could also cover projects that exclusively benefit LMI persons by requiring an application and income verification process. Last option is for projects where we can reasonably conclude that the beneficiaries will be primarily LMI persons based on the nature and location of the activities. For example, if we were to construct a daycare facility that is designed to serve residents of a public housing complex, we could assume that the beneficiaries would be LMI households. Next is job creation and retention. This addresses activities designed to create or retain permanent jobs, at least 51% of which will be made available to or held by LMI persons. Industrial infrastructure projects fall under this national objective. Last, we have LMI housing, which is applicable to many DR projects and applies to activities that are undertaken for the purpose of providing or improving permanent residential structures, which will be occupied by LMI households. Examples might include new construction or rehabilitation of housing. Even if the LMI national objective will not be used, the application preparer must provide LMI data as part of the application for HUD reporting purposes. We'll demonstrate how to obtain the relevant LMI data later this week when we discuss closeout forms, as it's the same process at the time of application and closeout. Next, we have the Slum and Blight National Objective, which is required for demolition and downtown revitalization projects. Under this national objective, activities are carried out to address one or more of the conditions which have contributed to deterioration. To meet this national objective on an area basis, the designated area in which the activity occurs must meet the definition of a slum, blighted, deteriorated, or deteriorating area under state and local law. Additionally, the area must meet either one of two conditions. Either at least two public improvements throughout the area are in a general state of deterioration, or at least 25% of the properties throughout the area exhibit certain characteristics, such as physical deterioration of buildings or improvements, abandonment of properties, chronic high occupancy turnover rates or chronic high vacancy rates in commercial or industrial buildings, significant declines in property values or abnormally low property values relative to other areas in the community, or known or suspected environmental contamination. Documentation must be maintained on the boundaries of the area and the conditions that qualified the area at the time of its designation. This requires a resolution passed by the governing legislative body declaring the area blighted in accordance with 24 CFR 570. At the time of application, the applicant will be asked to provide the resolution as well as documentation showing the boundaries of the designated area. Under spot basis, the activities must eliminate specific conditions of blight or physical decay on a spot basis. Rehabilitation is limited to the extent necessary to eliminate a specific condition detrimental to public health and safety. At the time of application, the applicant will be asked to provide documentation of the building code level of violation or applicable occupancy or habitability designation or code violation in a manner consistent with local ordinance. For both area basis and spot basis, documentation of the conditions that qualified the area at the time of designation, including photos or building surveys, must be submitted with the CDBG application. Next is the urgent need national objective. This is only for activities that alleviate emergency conditions. The existing conditions must pose a serious and immediate threat to the health or welfare of the community, and the emergency must have occurred no earlier than 18 months before applying. Under this national objective, you'll be asked to document the nature of the emergency in the application. Next, you'll determine eligible activities. The HCDA and HUD regulations specify the activities that are eligible for CDBG assistance. A general listing is pictured on this slide, and detailed descriptions of each eligible activity are provided in Section 105A of the HCDA. Please refer to the applicable application guidelines to view a list of eligible activities for the chosen application category. There are some activities that we are unable to fund. These include maintenance and operation, which refers to any cost that recurs on a regular basis, which is generally less than every 5 years. General government expenses, political activities, improvements to city halls and county courthouses, equipment purchases, income payments, pre-award cost, and religious purposes. Next, you'll select a grant writer and/or grant administrator. Before procuring for any services, the applicant should ensure that local procurement and conflict of interest policies exist. If utilizing CDBG funds for grant administration, 3 options are allowed. Option 1, the applicant could utilize current applicant staff or hire a new staff member. Option 2, the applicant could partner with a regional planning commission or council of governments as a sub-applicant to provide activity delivery. In this case, the applicant must be a dues-paying member of the RPC or COG for 12 consecutive months before applying. The RPC or COG must prepare the application and be listed as a sub-applicant, and only activity delivery cost may be incurred, which requires some additional documentation when submitting funding request. Option 3 is to competitively procure and select a private administrator, regional planning commission, or council of governments. To avoid conflicts of interest, we do recommend procuring for grant writing and grant administration concurrently when taking the procurement route. Make sure the contract clearly separates the writing and administration scopes and includes a contingency clause if CDBG funds will be used. If pre-selecting an administrator and intending to use CDBG funds, you will be asked to provide procurement documentation in order to receive a CDBG debar check approval letter. That letter and the executed contract must be submitted with the CDBG application. If you don't intend to use CDBG funds, we still recommend uploading some sort of documentation to show that you pre-selected so that you get some credit for project readiness during the scoring process. But the applicant would be free to procure according to their local procurement policy and state statute. As a reminder, in order to avoid conflicts of interest, administrators may not assist communities with a procurement process that they intend to submit a proposal for. You may provide them with contact information for your assigned compliance specialist, and the compliance specialist will assist them with the procurement process. For any local government staff in the room, we also have a procurement training later this week. Most CDBG projects outside of demolition projects and certain emergency projects require the services of an engineer or architect to assist with preparing the application in the form of a preliminary engineering report or architectural report and subsequent final design. The firm must be competitively procured if intending to use CDBG funds for final design and construction inspection. The RFQ process will be discussed in Thursday's procurement session. CDBG does not typically pay for PERs or PARs, so it's important to separate the preliminary design scope from the final design and inspection scopes in the engineering or architectural services contract. Similarly to the grant administrator selection process, if pre-selecting an engineer or architect and intending to use CDBG funds, you will be asked to provide procurement documentation in order to receive a CDBG debar check approval letter. That letter and the executed contract must be submitted with the CDBG application. If you don't intend to use CDBG funds, we do still recommend uploading some sort of documentation to show that you pre-selected so that you get some credit for project readiness during the scoring process. Most PERs will require the content listed here. Wastewater PERs follow a similar structure but have more detailed requirements for each section. We of course need a title page that is signed and sealed by a Missouri licensed professional engineer. This should include the project name, owner, PER preparer, submittal date, project summary, and any relevant maps, photos, and sketches. We'll also need a description of existing conditions and the projected population of the proposed service area. A description of needs to be addressed by the proposed project, which includes the current status and any future needs. At least 3 alternatives that include a description of construction and anticipated ongoing operation and maintenance, the recommended alternative and reason for selection, the total estimated project cost and anticipated annual operation and maintenance cost, an explanation of project financing, including how the project operation, maintenance, and any debt repayment cost will be paid, and environmental review considerations, which should include environmental impacts of the project, any anticipated ER clearance request from various agencies, anticipated regulatory permits, and the timeline for project clearance. And then for clearance, please consider timelines for clearance from all funding agencies and provide any additional information or recommendations. For the PAR, some of these items will be similar to the engineering report content. So again, we need a title page that is signed and sealed by a Missouri licensed architect. Then please include a statement summarizing the goals of the project and the design principles governing the project. Principles might be public spaces receive the highest level of preservation, or preserving the primary elevations of the building, or retaining as many original design elements as possible, to name a few. Again, three alternatives must be considered. Photographs of exterior and interior conditions labeled and keyed to the site map and floor plans. Maps including an area map, site map, and topographic map. Completed scaled floor plans of the proposed structure that indicate all proposed new construction and demolition plans that indicate all proposed demolition. All elevations of the existing building. If any elevation will be changed, those changes must be noted. And then sections should be provided when necessary to understand the project. You can contact SHPO to determine if sections are necessary. They may require the submission of a drawing that shows a cut-through view of the building to show the interior. This typically occurs when a project involves rehabilitation, addition, or demolition to a potentially historic property. Please also include specifications. These should be provided to a certain extent, but more general notes are acceptable in the preliminary stages of a project. Cost estimates and project financing will be similar to what we went over for the PER content. And the architect should also include in the plan a statement or certification that all improvements are consistent with the Americans with Disabilities Act and related laws. We now consider the environmental review. Every project is subject to National Environmental Policy Act requirements once that initial application public hearing takes place. Please obtain a FEMA floodplain map showing the project area. After obtaining that map, please contact our environmental review team if the project lies in a floodplain or floodway, as there are additional restrictions on activities in those areas. SHPO Section 106 consideration is also important because sometimes that Section 106 review results in a memorandum of agreement or recordation on historic structures, and if one of those items is triggered, the applicant needs to budget for it. Some applicants may wish to begin the environmental review before CDBG grant approval, but this is not required. While allowable, if the applicant wishes for these costs to be eligible for CDBG funding, then the applicant must procure an environmental review preparer, which is typically a grant administrator, in accordance with CDBG or local procurement requirements, whichever is stricter. If the project is not awarded by CDBG, then any costs associated with completing the environmental review prior to grant award are the responsibility of the applicant. Water and wastewater applicants are encouraged to begin the ER process upon receipt of the CDBG invitation to apply due to the complexity of those projects and their ER considerations. Next is completing the budget package. There are a few items to think about here. First, we consider cost effectiveness. So we ask ourselves, would a prudent person spend this amount on the project? Then we consider CDBG as gap financing. CDBG is a gap financing program, meaning that we only step in to fill gaps in financing after all other options are considered. As part of the application review process, the applicant will be asked to provide various financial statements and an explanation of previous steps taken to address the need. We have a thorough financial forms training available on our website to assist with that section. Next, we consider letters of commitment. Any match contributions from the applicant, private entities, or other state and federal agencies must be committed to in writing at the time of application. We also want to ensure consistency throughout the application and supporting documentation. For example, the budget on the PER or PAR and the budget on the application cost summary have to match because we need to see some sort of supporting documentation for how the cost was determined. And lastly, consider application and activity maximums. We already discussed application maximums, so we'll jump into activity maximums next. Professional service fees can be included on top of the grant maximum, but are also subject to certain activity caps. These maximums may not be used as the only basis for determining compensation for professional services. Additionally, these are maximums for the award, but we only reimburse actual incurred costs. If actual incurred costs come in below the award amount, the subrecipient would be expected to deobligate remaining funds. For the administration maximum, the maximum will depend on which program you're operating under. For annual and CV projects, the administration maximum is $10,000 plus 4% of the CDBG funded construction or demolition activities cost. For DR, admin is capped at 1% of the total DR cost, and for mitigation, no administration costs are approved. For engineering design, please use the ASCE table in the application guidelines. This will be based on the total construction cost. Architectural design is capped at 10% of the total construction cost. Construction inspection is capped at 75% of the total engineering or architectural design cost. The cultural resource survey is capped at $5,000, but it must be done as a budget amendment request under other professional services. And demolition inspections are capped at $425 per unit. Again, these maximums may not be used as the only basis for determining compensation for professional services. The application preparer will complete a cost summary. In this cost summary, you will break the budget down into CDBG eligible activities and list the proposed funding for each. The template is provided here. In the first column is a list of activities. Professional service activities and demolition activities are listed for you, and then you'll need to add in the main activities from the list of CDBG eligible activities that we discussed previously, depending on the project type. So if I was doing a streets project, I would need to add a streets activity. If I was installing a generator, I'd list the machinery/equipment activity. Please only select activities from that list of CDBG eligible activities. In the CDBG funds column, you'll enter the amount of CDBG funds that you're requesting for each activity, keeping allowable maximums in mind. Cash match would include any funds committed by the applicant. This includes any loan funds. In-kind match refers to staff hours, equipment use, or land donations provided by the applicant. Private match would include funds committed by private entities or individuals. So you would definitely need this for demolition and economic development projects. You may also have items to list here if a nonprofit sub-applicant is committing match. And other state and federal funds, of course, are funds committed by other state and federal entities. Once the preliminary cost estimate is complete, you can start gearing up for the application public hearing. Before the public hearing, certain civil rights requirements should be met. The applicant should have a fair housing ordinance, excessive use of force policy, four-factor analysis, Section 504 self-evaluation, and Section 504 grievance procedures. Samples of all of these are available on our website. Our development team will discuss specific public hearing requirements later today, but I want to stress that the project is subject to NEPA and Uniform Relocation Act requirements once the public hearing occurs. We'll discuss those NEPA and URA requirements in detail tomorrow. Once the public hearing and community needs assessment is complete, the applicant will adopt a resolution to apply for CDBG funds. A sample is available on our website. If the applicant would like to, they may obtain and submit letters of support from their state representative and state senator for up to 5 bonus points. Once the planning process is complete, there are a few additional housekeeping items to take care of. Our application companion guide includes step-by-step instructions on how to pull the remaining required data from the census website. Please use the census data corresponding to the current HUD LMI data. For example, the current HUD LMI data covers 2016 through 2020, so we ask that you use 2020 census data to report various demographic data on the application. Links to required forms are available on our website. Once the application package is complete, please submit according to the applicable process for the application type. With the exception of long-term recovery and emergency projects, projects will be scored by CDBG. Once the application is submitted to our office, it undergoes an accuracy review to ensure information is complete, accurate, and consistent. The applicant is given a brief window to submit revisions. Once all revisions are received, we move forward with the CDBG scoring process and the approval and denial recommendations. Those recommendations go up through leadership at the CDBG division and department levels for review. Once a final determination is made, we notify the applicant of the decision. In addition to the items we've mentioned already, we want to leave you with some best practices for application preparation. Number one is to review relevant application guidelines before you sit down to prepare an application. This can reduce a lot of accuracy errors. Also, please verify eligibility with CDBG staff before applying. It's so disheartening for us, the community, and the application preparer when we have to deny an application based on ineligibility after a team has put so much time and effort into planning for the project and preparing for the application. Our development team is available to walk through the proposed project with you to ensure eligibility, so please use them as a resource. Prepare all documentation before applying. It's much easier to save documentation throughout the planning process for submission than to have to go back and request documents in the middle of completing the application. Answer narrative questions completely. Our Chief Development Officer, Debbie, will provide additional guidance on preparing application narratives later on this week. Ensure provided information is consistent throughout the application, especially when it comes to the proposed budget in the PER and PAR matching the CDBG cost summary. Allow plenty of time to complete and review the application before submitting, as that will ultimately result in a more polished application. Participate in CDBG application training opportunities. Application training is offered before opening each cycle, and we may provide additional application trainings as part of our monthly training webinars. Our development team also hosts virtual application office hours every Wednesday at 10 a.m. This provides an opportunity for grant writers to talk through any questions they may have for our planning team. And lastly, provide application feedback to CDBG. We've recently made some improvements to our application processes and always value and appreciate feedback about what's working and what isn't. I've hinted at quite a few resources throughout this session, and you'll see where to find them when Ashley presents later this morning. One item I'd like to highlight is how to sign up for CDBG email updates. These email updates are how we communicate monthly program and policy updates, upcoming trainings, application cycles, and citizen engagement opportunities like action plan public hearings and comment periods. If you haven't already, please scan the QR code on the screen here or navigate to the link manually. Once the page is pulled up, please follow the prompts until you see options for various updates. Community Development Block Grant is under the Community section. We'll leave this link on the screen so everyone has time to sign up while we open the floor for questions.